Hey all, Scott again. It's part two of my treatise on B5, Horror on the Hill. And today we're going to go through kind of the meat of the adventure, and that's going to be pages 10 through 23. That's going to take you through the monastery on the hill and also the first level of the dungeon. One of the things, I'm going to grab my notes here, that I've been looking at since I did the previous video, part one on this. I was thinking about other, avenues and stuff like that that you could go through when you are trying to set up a campaign. And I had talked about doing a winter setting, which I'd never done before in this one, but it might be really interesting because you have the River Shrill, which is, according to Douglas Niles, the writer, is a mile wide at the very least. So that's going to be very difficult for the Goblin King or anything like that to come across. But you could have druids foretell a very, very cold winter. This allows you to A, start a winter setting, and B, say that the River Shrill is going to get frozen over, it's going to get so cold, and that will give the Goblin King and all of his forces the ability to get across the River Shrill into Guido's fort and destroy it. And it also will allow you to do a couple things. One of the things that I always love about movies that take place in Japan, samurai flicks, a lot of times you'll see them in the winter with the trees covered and sword fights on lonely roads in the snow. I think that would be a great way to set up some of the things that happen on this setting. It also gives you the ability to track in the snow, which is kind of cool. You can put in a lot of other snow elements or creatures that have to do with the snow. It changes the aspect of the Fae, dryads and stuff in winter, anything else that you might come across there. And then gives you obviously the ability to have a distinct threat to Guido's fort, something that they would have to deal with and try to take care of. And also we're talking about steam vents that go through the entirety of the adventure that are coming out of the hill, which are pictured in the cover. One of the things that I thought might be interesting as well that I came across when I was going through this earlier today, I thought, how about having Guido's fort be here? A lot of times we saw, like in England or these things, where Romans would set up natural heated springs and baths. This could be one of those places because you've got so much tectonic activity with these vents that there could be great mineral baths and stuff in Guido's fort, which is why people are up here in the first place in the middle of nowhere. So that's just the thought process. That's one of my first notes there. But let's get into it. We're going to talk first, when it gets into page 10, it goes again through some wandering monsters. Those wandering monsters are the basic hobgoblin, goblin, skeleton, stuff like that. But there are two that are interesting to me. One of them are rock baboons. Again, if you're doing a winter setting, you could have them be white baboons. They could be something really cool to put in and might throw at you. These are wandering monsters in the monastery, which you'll find at the back of the hill. And the monastery is a weird thing. I don't know when Douglas was writing it exactly what he was going for with the monastery. It seems like it's a decrepit monastery and it does have some undead in it, but they're not really utilized. Just some skeletons in a single crypt. And I think that's a big waste because there's a graveyard and other stuff that can be great used. This is also a ruin. And if you had more undead here, you could have them be kind of a foil or a threat to the goblins and the hobgoblins and make them a little more weary, which kind of could explain why they don't have so many sentries or stuff up, because they're kind of holed up in the last bastion of the monastery, which will be the first map in this. And one of the things that I would tell you to do if you're running this module, please get copies of the interior maps, because it's going to be hard to flip pages back and forth to try to get to those maps. Back in the day, I know I'd go to the library and get those run off for, I don't know, 10 cents a copy or something like that, but most everyone has a copier in the house now where you can just scan it and print it. So very easy, but get those maps so you've got them available to you because you don't want to have to keep flipping back and forth when you're going over the first level of the dungeon. There are also giant centipedes here. This is another Niles where he keeps putting these things in the module that are insects. I'm going to go back to the insect shaman that I talked about in part 1. That's a great add here. It also gives you a boss that you could put in the monastery, because the monastery at this point doesn't have a boss. But it is kind of a culmination to the overall outside quandary of the hill. So that being said, it's a perfect place to have a boss or have that shaman and have him still controlling the giant centipedes or whatever else that you have in there. And he could be a foil to the ogre, which is inside the monastery buildings itself, that is also running the hobgoblins in there. Then you've also got the undead. If you don't want to use a insect shaman, you could always have a greater undead in there, a white vampire spawn, something like that. Whatever the case, I just think it's a waste unless you put some more stuff in there, especially in the crypt. But anyway, this then takes you from the crypt into the main building of the monastery. The main building of the monastery is, it's fallen apart, but there are hobgoblins in it. The most interesting place inside here to me, and one of the things I loved about this adventure, especially when I played it in AD&D, was that there's a secret door that leads to a magic fountain. Niles puts in the magic fountain and has the ability to add a couple of hit points if you drink it permanently. Also permanently add to an ability score or to a prime requisite. And also all those are negatives too. And you have to roll on a chart to see if you get bad negatives to those things or permanently additions to those things. That was one of the things we found in AD&D was that your ability scores were not moving up. They obviously changed that come 3rd edition, and then it's gone since then into 5th edition, and you can change those, so it's not such a big deal, but it was such a big deal to me. I love this magic fountain. I don't care how many times I had to roll on it or what the risks were. It's a great thing to have in there, and it's just fun, especially if you want to have your players try to push their luck, which is basically, I think, why it's in there. And that's on the first level as well. There are goblins, there are ogres in here. Again, I would say they're wary of either the undead or the bugs if the shaman is out there. That keeps them in their lair toward the back of the monastery. And they also have a couple of Neanderthals that they've caught here. Now, we've talked about the Neanderthals in the 1st edition of this. This is another great place to find them because there are a couple of them. You could use them again as fodder, henchmen, have them go with you because they're going to be very, very happy to see you because they're expecting the ogre to come in and deal with them for whatever way that they're going to get dealt with. After you finish up the monastery, which isn't a lot of activity here, except for the ogre really that's actually listed in the module, you're going to go into the first level of what I call the King's Hall. This is the first level of the dungeon. It's a standard dungeon, pre-built dungeon that you could put up with tiles if you needed to very easily. It's squared off. It's not a big deal. But one of the things that I looked at when I've checked out this module, I always wanted to ask myself why. Why is it like this? Because there are a couple things in here that question. One of the things is, if this is the Goblin King, why are there so few goblins in this lair? Typically you see a lot of goblins when you see things. One of the things that I said is the Goblin King keeps an elite cadre of goblins within this hall. You can up their hit dice if you want to make them more elite. Your choice. But comparatively, there aren't a vast amount of goblins in here, or hobgoblins. So you could say that those are his elite workers. The rest of his army, which he's going to assault Guido's fort with, is out on the hill. They can't be brought in because they feud, they fight, they kill each other, and it's not something that he can have. So he can only keep his certain number of hobgoblins and goblins here that are very loyal to him and are his elite strike force. He's also got a small strike force of bugbears in here. You're going to see them in the first few rooms. And you get to use them as well to give them more of a shock troop or heavy hitting area. There's also, within here, you've got a standard evil cleric. You can keep the cleric if you want to. That's a give or take, but there are several rooms dedicated to it, including a shrine. I don't know why the goblins are worshiping there to a human cleric, but nevertheless, they seem to be. Again, you could change that out as you like, or you could have the human cleric be an ally to the poacher, which I alluded to in part 1. Again, not in the module, but the poacher is a perfect person to have as an agent of the king that's also working back at Guido's fort. He could play a very pivotal role here. He could be in the same rooms as the priest. You could have them be, a duo, husband and wife, whatever you're thinking there, 2 dudes, whatever, I don't care. It's just something that you could have in there that gives you a little bit extra flavor and flair. And I'll tell you why it's really important, because there are 2 things within this module that make absolutely no sense to me. And that is that in 2 rooms, that would be room 51, which is the arena, and 59, which is called the battle room, there are dead adventurers. I don't know why. You come across them and they seemingly have just died. So unless they went in the same way, there's only one way in, that you did, I don't know how they got in here without getting, slaughtered or leaving a slaughter in their path. And they're just randomly there dead, and they still got their, like in the arena, they're dead with arrows in them, they have magic items on them, with a couple wolves guarding them. So my point there is, I'm not sure why. Obviously the arrows would be there because it's an arena, so let's say the goblins just put them in there and shot them up. But why did they leave their magic items with them, and why were they in there in the first place? And then the battle room, there are 2 more adventurers that are dead in there that have gotten into a fight. One has a broken sword, still have their armor on, everything. No idea why. Never explained. But one of the things that I think that you should put in here, and especially if you go back to part 1, when you're setting up Guido's Fort, make another adventuring company that are here to compete with the company that your group is going out with. Have them be not friendly. They're here to get their own gold and do it their own way. They're a bunch of jerks, which is pretty easy to do, and they won't be liked. And you can find them dead in here. And oddly enough, there are 3 fighters listed, 2 thieves, and 1 magic user. So they don't even have a cleric. What kind of morons are going out without a cleric anyway? Of course they're going to die. And if they're no good, or up to no good, that you can say that they are, they could have had access to the poacher. The poacher could have led them out here, led them inside, and therefore passed notes or whatever, led them into the arena where all the goblins popped up and bam, nailed them. And then the other 2 that are found in the battle room could have been people that he saved, quote unquote, and let the others die so he could give them more treasure or access to the Goblin King, but then killed them in the battle room. So that explains why they're there. Something that really needs to be explained, because otherwise there's no reason to have people just lying around recently dead with, +1 swords or bows or whatever that they've got on them. So something to think about. There's also another room in here, very middle kind of, right of the map, which is the aviary, which has something called piranha birds. Maybe they were just wanting to make piranha birds. I don't know, but I have no idea why an aviary that's enclosed would be there. There's no access to the exterior or outside that I'm aware of in this particular room. Nothing on the map, at least. So unless you wanted to put a vent here where the birds could fly in and out of, I'm not sure why it's there. Might be something to rethink. Nevertheless, those are my 2 changes or gripes with this adventure, but they're so easily changed, and they can make a great story if you're using the poacher and having this other adventuring company pre-set up and met before you leave Guido's Fort. So they're out here. You could even see on the hill places that they might have killed things, or you could run into them and they could brag about what gold they have or blah, 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 or show off their weapons that then you get later when you find them dead. Perfect. That's something that I would do, and I think my players would certainly enjoy it. And then at the end, you've got the huge fight with the king. There's a great picture in here by Jim Holloway, and it reminds me a little bit of the Rankin Bass Hobbit, where you see the Goblin King. I don't think it necessarily looks like that Goblin King, but it just reminded me of it. I absolutely love this picture. Take a look. And after that, you have a massive fight where you can get back into it between both of them. The Goblin King and the party. There's a lot of goblins here. I usually have them come in waves. They come out of other rooms. It's a great big fight scene, and you're going to be exhausted, beat down afterwards. I know one of the things that my players typically say with this fight is, how did you know we weren't going to die? Well, that's the trick of the trade, folks. Get them to think they're going to die, but then they're not. Then they don't die. Somehow you're hoping that those D20s come up with 20s, and you make some rolls, and you protect each other. That's obviously an important thing. You collect your treasure here. Everyone's happy, beat down, but boy, you got the treasure. You killed the Goblin King. You couldn't be happier. You exit, because there's only one exit, because it's the same way you came in. And when you exit, there is a trap door in the floor that's like 25 feet long or something. It drops you into the second level of the dungeon, and then it's all out from there, because you're never getting back out of here again until you get all the way through the dungeon and the dragon. The dragon, yeah, dungeon and dragon, get it? But anyway, that will take you through the bulk of this adventure. It's fantastically fun. I couldn't like it anymore, obviously, if I continue to talk about this. But remember the wrinkles that I've talked about here if you're running this one. Again, I don't think this is an expensive module. No one's out there fighting for B5 or on the hill. So go out and get it and play it. Play it in any edition you can. I've played it in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 3.5, Pathfinder, and 5e. So I think you'll find it very easy to convert. Not much to it because everything's just basically in the book, and there aren't a lot of traps and stuff like that. And if there are, just throw in the DC for a 5e. It's pretty easy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and part 3 will be coming, which is the lower dungeons and the kind of fun that I have down there, because I got some more stories for you. So otherwise, we'll talk to you later. Thanks again. I hope you subscribe. And if you have a chance, go to see artofthegenre.com, where I've got a lot of my products that I've made up on huge sales. So take a look.